All right, we are back. This is day 6, celebrating our coverage of the Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc and all other events associated with UTMB week. We are in our northeast Chamonix studios, a little bit away from city center. Real quick, thanks to our partners NAC, Norda, Goreware, and Raid for making all of these conversations possible. We have the pleasure today of being joined by Hillary Gerardi. Hillary, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm happy to be here. I didn't have to come very far to join you. There's a lot of hustle and bustle around, and, it's kind of nice to be able to be on the periphery of that and not be, all anxious about an imminent race and looking at the weather and stressing out and all that. So I feel relatively relaxed.
I don't know if you were there, but I think you were, and I think this is an interesting place to start. The first year that I got into trail and mountain running, I was living in New England. So I grew up in like the Portland, Maine area, Cape Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. And I went over to Stowe, Vermont, and on a whim did this race called the Mansfield Double Up.
Yes, I did that.
And I think you were there that year. And there was like 30 of us there. I'm pretty sure you won either outright.
The only time I did it, I was once, and I won for women, but not outright.
Okay. Crazy course.
It was like kind of parts of it were kind of skyrunning style, and I think that's why I really liked it.
Yeah.
That's so funny that you were there. I almost forgot about that race.
Yeah, and I actually, before this conversation, I went online and looked to see like where that event still stands, and I think it uses parts of the Long Trail,
I think
small parts on Mount Mansfield there.
Yeah.
And then now I guess for whatever reason they hold it biannually.
Okay.
But I thought that was cool because I have since gone a totally different route. I'm not really like a great runner, but the events that I've pursued are much more tame. And that's our lone intersection, I think, is the 2016 Mansfield Double Up.
Oh, that is fun. I mean, I have done precious few races in the US. So the fact that you were there for one of them is like, pretty serendipitous.
What Great Adirondack Trail Race was that the other one?
Great Adirondack Trail Race was my first ever trail race, and that is a good one. I really, really would recommend it. It is annual, and it goes through the Adirondack Park, and so for that reason, they can't do a mass start, and so it's like a time trial, one person per minute going, and that's just like, it's a very different, mentally you're out on the trail, and like if you see anybody else, it's like they're at least a minute ahead or a minute behind you, if not more. So like it's very much your own challenge that you're doing.
If I was, because obviously like the specter of UTMB is like shrouding this house right now, and like that's been such a theme in all these conversations, but like in your case, if I was to even like ask the question, like, have you done a UTMB race before? Or like, what do you think about CCC? Would that almost be out of scope for you because it's just not the part of this sport that you dabble in?
I get asked the question a lot. It's an entirely fair question, but, I think that possibly because I started racing in Europe, even though, obviously UTMB is huge in Europe and it's huge all around the world, but there is a lot more different kinds of racing in Europe, I think. And ultras are not necessarily like kind of the only thing, if you will. And so I think that it was like easier almost for me to find my niche, having really leaned into racing and trail running in Europe than it might have been if I had been starting in the US. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but yeah.
Culturally, how closely in tandem do skyrunning and trail running compete for, registrants at the start line and attention and fanfare, stuff like that?
Skyrunning is way smaller.
Oh, okay.
And the reason for that is that the average race is going to have far fewer participants, and a lot of that's for safety reasons. And like when you're out on an extreme course, you can't have quite as many people. The time cutoffs are oftentimes like quite a bit harder. And then there's like sort of, this self-selection where it seems like too extreme. And part of that is like the images that are put out, it's like always the most intense portion of a course. But yeah, I think that it's definitely much more niche. And in Europe, though, and in France, I mean, trail running as like a bigger category is huge. I mean, it's really massive. And I mean, when I was living, so I lived in Grenoble, France for 7 years. And like during the racing season on any given weekend, you could find at least a half dozen races that you could do within like, a couple hours, ranging in distances, many of them not ultras, like from 15 to 50K. And so it's like, it's a very popular sport in the sense also that like anybody can do it.
There's a lot of factors that play that constrain it in the US, but it's interesting to me that the most that this could be expressed was through like ski resorts. It's a public lands issue, obviously, and people interact with the sport differently in the US. But yeah, like I'm trying to think of what the Skyrunner series, you would probably know better than me. I'm trying to think of like what the key events were on the Skyrunner series in the US in the mid 2010s, because I feel like that whole circuit's kind of died down.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but like definitely the Rut.
The Rut is a great one,
which is the only one that I did. But I mean, I even think that as far as skyrunning goes, like it doesn't, to me, isn't super representative of my experience of skyrunning in Europe, which of course, like skyrunning as a sport was born in Europe. And like the idea was like, we're going to go from the church in the center of the village to the top of the mountain and back down. Like that's how it was born with this guy, Marino Giacometti, who was like really, one of the main founders and still is at the International Skyrunning Federation. But like, I think that part of it also that like you would be challenged. It's not like we don't have crazy terrain in the US, right? Like there is wild terrain, but you couldn't run a race through it. And the proximity, like I think one of the things that I do love about living in the Alps and racing in the Alps is this proximity of like centers of city centers, town centers, and the mountains. Like you don't, could definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but like the same proximity, I don't know where to find it. Either it's going to be like a small, ski resort, but people have been living in Chamonix for hundreds of years, yes. And it's like right there.
This is another interesting thing. It relates to skyrunning. We were doing a film on Jasmine Paris, and it was all around Barkley. And so the only world that I ever knew Jasmine in really was like the Barkley and the spine. And so like I kind of compartmentalized that. And then I was preparing for this and I saw that she was on the Skyrunner series. Like she has a sprint finish with you.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't know that Jasmine was like capable of that in that world.
I think, that's like one of my proudest moments. I think beating Jasmine.
That's incredible. For anyone that doesn't know, talk us through that moment.
Oh man, that was in 2018 at the Glencoe Skyline race, which so like back in the day, skyrunning like had different sort of categories, and Glencoe Skyline was like an extreme race, and Trofeo Kima was an extreme race, or is still, but is no longer like categorized as such, and Tromsø up in Norway as well. And we just like spent the entire race kind of like going back and forth. I had twisted an ankle a couple days prior doing the vertical kilometer race. And so like I was going pretty slow on the downhill. So she'd pass me every downhill, I'd pass her every uphill. And as we were like getting into the final downhill, I was like, all right, so Jasmine, like if I manage to hang on to you, like through this downhill, like, what are we going to do? Like, are we going to finish hand in hand? Like we oftentimes see in trail running. Yeah. And she just goes, no, it'll be a sprint finish. And I was like, okay, all right. And I have so much respect for that too, because like, I feel like, yeah, it's a race until the end. And so I remember like running and like keeping that in my mind. Like, I know there's this flat section at the very end. Like I gotta have what it takes to, have one last kick.
Do you feel, because again, just like thinking about Jasmine and that's sort of just like this objectively killer instinct towards competition, do you feel like you're more accommodating? Like you could see yourself holding hands at the finish?
I don't think I ever have.
Sounds like you were negotiating it there though, possibly.
Yeah. I think, I was still like kind of figuring out who I was as a runner at that point. And, when I don't know if you guys have seen the images of the end of the Mont Blanc 90K this year.
Yeah.
With Schumi coming in thinking he's like in third place, and then Gaëtan Hérault like coming around like sprinting, and some people were like, oh, what a poor sport, like trying to out sprint him at the end. And like, it's a race, man. Like, I don't know. I thought it was like totally fair game. Would it suck to get like passed in the last, couple, steps of a race? Absolutely. But on the other hand, like we all signed up for a competition. I don't know.
We'll come back to skyrunning in a second, but we were talking offline, and you've lived in France, Grenoble, Chamonix Valley for going on 15, 16 years. And Bora was commenting on how we listened to you on a podcast, and you've got like near perfect, indistinguishable French.
Are you going to ask me to speak French on this podcast?
Well, and you said something interesting to me, which is when you are immersed in like new language acquisition, you sort of have to set aside your personality for a little while. Talk like that. That was so interesting to me. Talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like, when you're first learning a language, when your comprehension is, like slower, right? You're not getting all the words. You're like trying to place everything into context. It can take you a while longer to understand things. So I remember like being at, like parties and stuff, and like somebody would like tell a joke or say something funny and everyone would laugh. And then like 3 minutes later, I'd be like, and I generally think of myself as like somebody who's like, relatively, quick-witted and stuff. And like, so that's one example. Another example is that like, I volunteered this anecdote immediately, right? When we barely know each other, and I'm somebody who's relatively outgoing and I like to tell stories, and for the first, several years, I couldn't do that because I just didn't have, I didn't have the vocabulary, I didn't have the grammar, I didn't have the speed. Now, I'm not somebody who's super scared to make mistakes in a foreign language. Like, I know that some people can be so nervous about getting it wrong that they don't want to say anything. That's not necessarily my case. I'll like go for it and it'll be like horribly wrong. But I still just like, you'd have to like kind of prepare the sentences in your head to be like, okay, I'm going to say this, like, how do I phrase this? What are the words I need? How can I like get around the word I don't know? And like, it just takes a long time. So yeah, you just have to spend this time where you don't get to be you. You don't get to have your personality. You can't tell the stories or the jokes or understand the jokes. And I actually remember this one guy who was like a friend of ours early on. And, like he was always telling jokes, and like, I didn't really understand everything. So I just kind of like laughed, like, ha, ha. And then like, after a couple of years, as my French got better, I realized that like, I did not think he was funny. And like, in fact, I thought he was kind of a misogynist. And so like, once my French was good enough, I'd like start kind of clapping back at him and be like, dude, like questioning him and being like, no, that's not cool. And then like, after a few years, we just realized that like, we didn't even like each other. But we've been like friends for a couple of years just because like, he thought I was like this nice, smiley, amiable girl who like laughed at all of his jokes. And then once I figured it out, I was like, no.
Is that approach to like, assimilating into a new country and like a new culture, is that approach like, does that make that whole experience like pretty predictably exciting, or did it feel isolating at all?
Well, it actually felt super isolating. early on, in part also because, so like when I moved to France, I was with my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, and we did everything together in the mountains. But he had studied abroad in Grenoble, and like he had a bunch of friends. So like all of my friends were his friends, and like it was his community and his activities. And so I was like pretty dependent on him at first, and especially like he spoke French and I was learning. And it really actually wasn't, I would say, like through trail running, I like found a community, and like my French was definitely, it was like, kind of getting way better. And then like I found this sport that I really liked and that I was like excelling at. And there's this extraordinary community around Grenoble, France, of runners. And it was kind of like, as I started running was like the moment where I like started to feel a lot less isolated.
This is, I feel like it's cliche, but it's the only comparison I know. Like, of all the other languages out there, I always hear that with German, there's sort of like a word for everything. And they are able to, they have more resources to pull from to describe the world around them. And when you think about the French language, are there any perspectives you pick up or ways you can describe things that fall short in English?
Oh yeah. I mean, like there are definitely some words and like expressions that I just like can't find equivalents of. And it's funny because like my husband and I at this point are like definitely one of those really annoying couples that like sprinkles foreign language words into our conversations. But just like sometimes it's like it just works way better in a different or in French. And I mean, I wish I could come up with a really great example off the top of my head, but like I just like n'importe quoi is an expression that like I don't really like it. It can mean like if somebody's doing n'importe quoi, it's like that they're like just kind of like being stupid, but then like I can't, yeah, I can't, I don't, I like literally once you've got it, it's like so useful.
Okay.
But I think that we also can find it even like within the English language, because there are a lot of Brits in the Chamonix Valley. And like I learned, for example, the word to faff. Are you familiar with faffing? Yeah, no, faffing is just like being inefficient. Or like, like it's just like that sounds like a pain in the ass. Like that would take way too long. So like, like, oh yeah, I need to go get something in Chamonix, but like with all those people, it's like that would be way too much of a faff. Or like if you're like going like say if you like get out on a hike with somebody or a ski tour or something, and like every time you stop to like eat a snack or something, they like have to pull everything out of their bag to like get something that's at the very bottom and be like, stop faffing.
Okay.
And like, so I think almost like, yes, there's a linguistic difference, but like even within English, you get like these cultural linguistic differences. So like, I think that's one of the things that's really rich about learning new languages and meeting people who even speak the same language as you, but from a different cultural context, because you get these like very specific words that like, now that I have faff in my vocabulary, I don't know what I did before faff.
Yeah, and I'm just playing this in my head because today you did the exact opposite of faff, because you completed a training run and perfectly segued it into like quick shower, lunch, into this interview, and it was like exquisite timing.
I strive not to faff. Like that is very much like one of my goals is not to be a faffer.
Yeah, no, we've gotten a chance to see everyone's styles sort of before and after these interviews, how they approach them, what they were doing before, and you are incredibly efficient. So do you pack a lot into each day? Do you feel like?
I do.
Okay.
And I would say like my coach, for example, would say like too much.
Okay.
He was like, he's French, but the word that he used was like activité annexe, like annex or additional activities. He was like, stop doing so many like additional activities. Just like focus on your training, like take naps and I try to jam pack a little too much in sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure you get this question a lot, but and maybe this is more for the audience, like what are some things that you've discovered about French culture and maybe as it relates to like this sport that you would want the audience to appreciate?
Ooh, good question. I mean,
What's kept you here for 15 years culturally?
I mean, I think so. If you had plopped Brad and I down in Normandy, like we wouldn't still be here. I don't think. I think in some ways it's almost more like the Alpine culture than it is the French culture. Though I do very much like, France, and we both have French nationality now, and I think so. There's something I would say in France that I notice about French culture is that like people can seem pretty cold sometimes, like right off the bat, that like it's like the affect is like a little bit more cold. But then once you break the ice, like the relationships that you make are really deep and really strong. And I feel like conversely in the US, sometimes like people are super friendly. So like you look like you're lost on the street in a city and somebody will be like, oh, can I help you? Like, you're looking at a map. In France, they would never do that. But then like the like friendships, or you don't then like, invite them over to your house. Like in France, in the US, there's more like very welcoming, but then like you got to go really deep before you get like a strong relationship. Whereas in France, it's like you got to kind of, get through that first bit, and then you get these really, really almost more quickly stronger relationships. That's been my experience anyway. And I think that's something like, that people would be interesting for people to know when they come to France. There are like just very small, like, trail running, like cultural differences that I notice. And just trail generally is like, you always say bonjour on the trail. Like you never run past somebody without saying bonjour. It is considered extremely rude. And if you go in a store and you want to, like, you go in the grocery store and you're going to ask like somebody, hey, can you tell me where the, chips are? You always start with bonjour. You don't just say like, can you tell me? Like always bonjour. And if you don't, it's considered very rude.
And now that you say that, I have probably done that 4 or 5 times this week, where
somebody thinks you're really rude.
I go in with that sort of like all business, get to the point attitude of, if I'm going into a restaurant, I'll be like, table for 4, and then they'll be like, bonjour, like just like a scolding reminder. And Bora's seated up front multiple times now, because I think on the American side, maybe we just it's culturally we differentiate. How about among the athletes? Like, is there any difference in priorities or ways they approach the sport? Well, I guess you haven't spent a ton of time on the American side.
Yeah, so. I do feel like people oftentimes ask me to do like these comparisons, and I'm like, I don't really know in the US, like, because I really, even though I did do the Great Adirondack Trail Race when I started off my career, like pretty much all of my racing has been in Europe. So my relationship with trail running is much more anchored to Europe than it is with the US. So like I couldn't really compare. I guess one thing I would say, and I mentioned this before about like the different distances of races, is that in Europe, I do think that there is much more respect for the sub ultra distance races. And I think that that's something that's sort of, in a way, we're missing in the US, is that it's like everybody's got to go straight to ultra. And there's a lot of, I mean, like I know runners who have been doing mountain running and excelling at like mountain running. And when I say that, I mean the like standard 13K, either up or up and down mountain running, World Mountain Running Association races for like 25 years. And there's no like, and one day when I'm older, I will be doing ultras. It's like, no, this is my discipline. And I think that that's something that is definitely culturally different, that people don't necessarily say, you get to an event, like I'm only doing the 50K or something like that. It's just like sometimes the main event is the shorter distance race, and I think to me, that's something actually that is maybe one of the things that makes trail running a little bit more accessible in Europe, is because like there's much more celebration of shorter distances. And so including like, I mean, cross country, like tons of people are doing, and there are these tons of clubs, and people are running cross country for clubs or doing mountain running for clubs. And it's like very much a cool thing to do shorter distances.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and we basically have graduating classes of runners every year where there just comes a time in their career where with maybe a little bit of variation when they're moving up in distance.
Yeah. And I mean, I am in some ways being a hypocrite because I'm doing slightly longer distance races this year versus previous years. I mean, I did the Mont Blanc 90K in 2021. For me, part of that choice is because what personally motivates me at the moment is spending more time, like longer days in the mountains. And it's frustrating to live in Chamonix and be training for like a 3-hour race where like all you're doing is short, intense workouts and like looking up at the mountains and being like, oh, I want to be up there. But like, I very much believe that, that excelling at a 25K race is no less hard or no less valuable than excelling at a 100-miler. It's just a different discipline. And like the analogy that I kind of like beat into people's heads is that like, nobody is like, oh, that Usain Bolt, like what a wimp. He only runs 100 meters. It's like, no, it's just like, it's a different discipline. And you got to kind of in a way accept that like the training for it is different. Of course, then you get these standout athletes, like Killian, like Katie, we see recently that like do excel at all of the distances. And then you're like, damn, ruined my theory.
I'm just like super throwing this out there, guessing, speculating, but in European culture, or in French culture, I should say, compared to maybe American culture, is there more, like, is it valuable to sort of have like this stable identity in whatever craft you're doing? Because I feel like in America, there's this pressure to constantly be changing. Like I said, graduating in distance, being different than what you were the year prior. Whereas, like you said, like you could be comfortable in a particular discipline or event for decades, it seems like, on the European scene.
I think that you could. Yeah. I think that you could. I mean, I think that could be changing a little bit now because there is like a lot of crossover cultural influence going back and forth. But I do think, that there is like some people are very comfortable and like they know what they like and they want to keep doing that. One of the things I absolutely love too is going to like for example, the French mountain running championships, and you get these people running and they've got like, so you've got the bib on the front with your number and on the back it has what category you're in, and you'll get like master 8 or something, and it's like that person is 70 years old and is doing the French mountain running championship, and like that guy has been mountain running like for ages and like not interested in going to different disciplines, and I think that's just like pretty cool.
How early on in your move over to France did you know that it was going to be this like, commitment without like an expiration date, like you were going to be here for a really, really, really long time?
It was definitely not immediate. And in fact, so like I think a lot of people who are kind of moving to France, athletes who are living in France now, like they're getting on these talent visas and they can like stay for 4 years or whatever. I was not particularly talented when I moved to France.
Wait, what's a talent visa?
So a talent visa, you can get one if you're an athlete or maybe you're a scientist. And it's like basically, so my understanding of it is either that like you can bring something to the country, like whether it is like, a skill set or knowledge, maybe you're really good at AI and you could get a talent visa to be able to work there, or you're a talented athlete, for example. And in that case, the idea is that you are, in French, it's faire rayonner la France, which means that like you have enough of a following that you are going to like make France look good to your audience. So it's kind of like a soft power idea. So like a lot of the athletes who are living in France right now are on talent visas, and I had no particular talent when I first moved here, and so I was just like on a regular. I got a work visa. I was working at American school, and for the first 10 years that we were here, Brad and I were renewing our visa annually, and it's a long and frustrating process. But the positive side of that, I would say, is that every single year when it was like, okay, it's time to like get our whole, get all of our paperwork together and make an appointment and go to the prefecture 3 times. And we would be asking ourselves the question, like, are we happy here? Do I want to live here? Do I have projects? Like, do I still want to call this my home? And so it was now for those first 10 years anyway, it was like not a default, that we were just going to be here. It was like intentional. And I think maybe that's my like ever the optimist side of me. But like, I thought like the way I thought about it was like, oh, okay, we're like, I really want to be here. And that's why. And at this point now it can be a default because I now have French citizenship, but I like that.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to get too, well, actually, no, we can get as far off track as we want. I find it very interesting. I know that the visa process is like, can be traumatic and tough and whatnot, but I do think it's kind of cool that there is this built-in mechanism if you are away from the US that you do have to reevaluate on an annual basis whether you are happy with your current lifestyle. Like I live in Salt Lake City and there are no mechanisms in place for me to do this regular intervaled assessment of if I like my life. Like inertia just keeps taking me forward.
Well, exactly. And that's why I maintain positive memories of my annual visa renewal. Now the talent visa can be up to like 4 years. So like they might not be renewing it or having to ask themselves that question as often. And I mean, I will also say that I just want to remind us all that we're like, I'm extraordinarily privileged to be in that position where I'm like, oh, do I want to live here? Great. Like it's almost a foregone conclusion that I'm going to get a visa, because there are a lot of people who do not get that option to say like, do I want to live here? Do I want to move somewhere else? I'm not a white privileged person who can, but because I do have that choice, I'm happy to speak about it. But I do think that, sometimes people say to me like, oh my God, Hillary, you're so lucky to live in Chamonix. And I'm like, okay, like besides the people that the rest of the world that I just mentioned that doesn't have that privilege to be able to make decisions like that, for most of the people that I'm like hanging out with and stuff, like it's not like, is it really luck? Like, no, I have intentionally constructed my life in this way. And like, why couldn't you? Like, it's because you've made choices not to.
Yeah. If with the talent visa process, like, let's just say that, one of these years you submitted an athletic resume to the government official and it's like, I won marathon to Mont Blanc, Glencoe, all this stuff. Is there someone in that government office that is so discerning about ultra running or mountain running in that space? Like, would they know like, okay, like that is actually a legit result, like approved?
I do not think so.
Like,
no.
Could you have submitted a resume that's like Mansfield double up, great Adirondack race? Like, was it worked in the White Mountain huts for 5 years?
Like, I mean, because I never had a talent visa, like I don't actually know, but I know that like people had to like friends of mine have had to like submit articles from like the press, like talking about them. But like, could it be the Caledonian Record versus the Boston Globe? Like, yeah, probably. Like, how discerning are they? I don't really know. But like, and you have to like say, what are your projects? Like, what do you want to do? And I like know 3 people who are like, I'm going to set a record on Mont Blanc. And it's like, have you ever worn crampons? Well, no, but like, like aiming high.
I think this is something that I wonder if you wonder about because you are multidisciplinary and I feel like you're on like the fringes of a lot of different sports or like the nexus of a lot of different sports all at once. How often do you wonder about like your legitimacy as an alpinist?
Often. And I mean, so earlier we had a conversation, right, about how extreme Chamonix can be. And so like, there are the best alpinists in the world here, and they would look at what I do and like barely consider it alpinism, right? Because it's like more like glacier walking. And I think that, calling myself an alpinist is like almost only works in certain circles. And because of where I live, I am questioning that. But I think the positive side of that is that because I question it. For example, when I wanted to try to set the record on Mont Blanc, that pushed me really hard to want to be legitimate and to say like, I have this, I own this skill set. And so like a huge part of my preparation for that was, I'm working on my cramponing technique. I am working on my glacier crevasse rescue skills. I'm working on all this stuff. I'm spending a bunch of time up in the mountains, because like I wanted to be safe and I wanted to feel legitimate. But like, people do also ask me like, oh, well, Hillary, would you like want to be a mountain guide? For example, my husband's a mountain guide. Like, I know what it takes to become an IFMGA certified mountain guide. Like, I don't have that in me. Like, at least not right now. I'm not saying I could never, but like, I am not that level.
Do you feel pressure to like up the ante in anything you do?
I don't think that I feel pressure to up the ante. I think that, I'm now like old enough and experienced enough that I know, for example, like I don't really like being scared anymore. Like, and so like in terms of pushing things, in terms of especially like speed and technical terrain, like I know what I'm pretty like good with. And it does evolve over the course of a season, like that I feel more comfortable the more time I spend up in the mountains and stuff. But like, I don't feel like I need to, I'm not necessarily seeking adrenaline, at least not in like the risk-taking sense.
When was the last time you were in one of those like fear-based situations of like personal safety?
I feel like, I mean, so there are two kind of situations where like I sometimes feel scared. Much more common is being in avalanche terrain when I'm skiing. And I think that, that's something that I'm thinking about a lot. And that is a huge issue here. And I think that, every year I feel like scared. And sometimes I'm like probably more scared than I need to be. Yeah. But every winter, I'm anxious about that. In terms of like alpine climbing terrain, for the most part, I have like not done things that like really scare me. However, sometimes like if with Brad, we'll do like a long climbing route, for example. Sometimes it's just like the accumulated hours and hours of being like, of like exposure that like after, 6-7 hours, I'm just like, okay, like I'm done feeling like if I make a misstep, I could fall to my death. Like I've had enough for today. And not necessarily that it's like, oh, this is too hard for me technically, but it's just like, okay, like I've had enough accumulated exposure for one day and I want to be done now.
I think one of the reasons why, and I'm not sure if this makes sense here, but one of the reasons why I'm interested is offline we were talking about one of your favorite books, The Things They Carried. And then one of the themes from that is subjective versus objective truth. And I think in our sport of trail running, like you were saying, a lot of it is subjective because to the onlooker, what is visually happening in front of them looks fairly tame or boring, but there's like so much going on in the mind, for example. But in your case, like they're objective truths that you're grappling with.
Yes, but as we like mentioned, right, this like Chamonix being this like extreme place that like my objective truth of like that feeling like I'm in a really extreme situation for like, the majority of people living in the Chamonix Valley, it's like, oh, that's an easy route, And so there is still like this objectivity, subjectivity with it. And some of it kind of comes from, your perspective. Like to the average trail runner, what I'm doing seems like objectively crazy. And then to like the average mountain guide, they're like, oh, that's an easy walk in the park.
With something like the Mont Blanc FKT, how big is that? How big is the community around that? Like people that are interested in it, and it's,
I think that, so actually one of the things that motivated me behind the Mont Blanc FKT was that it is something that speaks to my community in a way. So like on a year-round basis, there are not that many trail runners living in the Chamonix Valley. There are a handful of us, but you can't really run year-round here. So like you have to be more of a sort of an all-around mountain athlete if you're going to be living here year-round, or you have to have like really a lot of mental toughness and be okay running on treadmills or with micro spikes in snow and on ice. But so like, our year-round community is more, I would say, like, skiers and alpinists and endurance athletes, but more of on the mountain side of things. And so for me, part of the motivation around Mont Blanc was like, this is something that resonates with my community. It like, generally if I would be in an evening with, or, a dinner party with a bunch of my husband's mountain guide colleagues, before it'd be like, oh, so what do you do? You're a trail runner. Okay, cool. Do you do the UTMB? No. Okay. And then like, that's the end of the question because they don't know anything about trail running, but like after Mont Blanc, it was like, that is something we can understand. Like that's something we can wrap our minds around. And so I think that the community here around that is actually maybe bigger than even just the pure trail running. And the second part of that is I think that, as I mentioned, I really worked on trying to, hammer in my alpine climbing skills beforehand. And my approach to doing the Mont Blanc FKT was I did not take the same route that Killian did. I actually varied my route so that there was less objective risk. That meant I had, like hybrid crampons, I had stiff boots, I had like all of the gear. And then like the guides all loved that. They were like, thank you for doing it in like real alpine style, in a way that like sometimes trail runners do not get that kind of acceptance or celebration.
What else, like if you were to go to another dinner party, what else would the guides be curious about now? Like what kind of questions would they ask?
I mean, I think they might ask about like, are there any other objects? Like, am I interested in the Matterhorn? Am I interested in, kind of other mountains? But that they have like, they know those routes.
Are they technically curious about like how you approached a certain section, stuff like that?
No, because they know the routes and like there isn't anything like, I mean, what they would be curious about is like, how did I hone in like the exact gear? Like I did a bunch of like, tinkering with my gear, like what shoes was I wearing? Like which crampons, like it's more of a, I would say gear centric, but because the route is relatively obvious and they've all done it a million times and they take their clients up it, there's no like, I mean, but people do get curious about like things like nutrition and,
Sure.
and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think because I watched the film and it was cool to see you engaging with like meteorologists and like figuring out weather windows. And again, just like all of the sources you had to tap into to really understand the mountain and like the time to go. And I think one of the things that like watching it, that was, again, like I was trying to put myself in your shoes, imagining what I would be frustrated with is just, again, like all of the contingencies that you had to deal with and the amount of uncertainty about when it was time to go. And that seems like a hallmark of this route. Like you could go months or even years without having the appropriate window to even have the attempt.
Yeah. Well, so that was actually my case. It was 2020 when all the races were canceled and I was doing a bunch more stuff in the mountains just because like, had time and was available. And I brought Mimi Kotka up Mont Blanc because she had never been up there before. And so first we did the Aiguille du Tour and we did like some other alpine stuff. And I brought her up Mont Blanc and she was like, you seem like pretty comfortable in this terrain. Would you want to try the Mont Blanc record? And I was kind of like, whoa, like I'm not legit to do that. I'm not fast enough. Emily is so good, like there's no way. And then like, she just like kind of kept reminding me like again and again. And in 2020, it was too late in the season anyway, but I was like, okay. And she like basically convinced me that I like should go for it. And 2021, like I sold it to my sponsors, I was like Black Diamond, Scarpa, like this is going to be a big objective this year. We didn't get enough snow. Just didn't get enough snow. It didn't fill in the junction. Like couldn't do that safely. I was like, okay, well, it's not going to be this year, but next year, 2022, same thing. Not enough snow. And I was at that point literally just being like, wow, like, I wonder if this is ever going to be possible to try, because you basically, so there's the Boson Glacier and the Taconag Glacier that come together at this key spot called the Junction. And you can still cross it, and it's always been a mess there. Like, you see the pictures from the first ascensionists and stuff like that, and it's always been a labyrinth of crevasses and all this. But every winter, it fills up with snow. In theory, it fills up with snow, and you could get across it quickly and safely. And it just didn't happen. And I was really curious about whether it was ever going to happen. And in 2023, we went I think a month and a half with no precipitation in January, February. And I was like, well, shit, once again, this isn't going to happen. And then we just happened to have March, April, tons of snow, and that made it possible. But so there is both is it going to happen at all? That was a big question. And then when is it going to happen? So it's okay, I think there's going to be enough snow. Then when do we do it? And I remember these conversations with my coaches being like, okay, sometime between mid-May and July. And he's not an alpinist, and he's very used to having a date, a race calendar, when UTMB 2028 is going to be. You got that out there. It's going to be about this time. And he would be like, would you think you can hone it into 1 week so we can get hit your peak fitness or whatever? And I was like, nope. No idea. It's going to depend on conditions, weather, all of these different things. So
did you have to forego a lot of other opportunities in those years just waiting for this to happen because you needed to kind of be ready possibly? Or was there enough of an advance notice about where weather was going that you could be like, it's not this time?
I wouldn't say that the previous year, by April of 2021 and 2022, I knew that it wasn't going to happen. So I didn't have to skip anything else. 2023, when it did happen, I would say more that I just I did not commit to anything in that window, that month and a half window. I didn't even want to make a dentist appointment because I was like, what if it's the day? And I actually, funnily, I got asked to be on the jury of the Chamonix Mountain Film Festival. And I said no, because I was like, what if? And it happened to be actually I went to the film festival that evening after I did the record. And I was like, and this is why I said no. It was possible. So definitely I was very single-minded around that. But I do want to also emphasize that what is one of the things that's really hard about it is that there are all of these different kind of things that have to line up in order to make an attempt possible. And then there is a whole kind of team around it. And you mentioned the meteorologist. There's a local meteorologist who actually does the weather forecast for UTMB as well. And we were talking, very frequently, because we knew okay, well, basically what the weather window had to look like. And he'd be like, okay, just got the latest models and this is what it looks like. And then the rest of the whole team, the friends who helped me with when I was working on my glacier skills, I wasn't going and doing that by myself, it was always with friends and partners and all that. And so it's something that it weighed super heavily on me because at the end of the day, I had to decide it was the day. Nobody else was going to make that call for me. But then, and maybe why it weighed heavily is because then I also had to be all right, everyone, we're ready. Let's do it. And so I was I think one of the reasons, if you've seen the video when I arrive at the church and yes. I'm just completely spent and sobbing. And part of that was because this giant weight was coming off my shoulders of I can stop thinking about this. I'm no longer have to be decision making.
You mentioned selling this to your partners. And the reason I bring it up is if we talk about scheduling on an annual basis with other athletes that come through here, because it's trail running, ultra running, they're kind of on the UTMB Western States treadmill, and there's just not much creativity there. But it sounds like you have flexibility in how you build projects. And are you cornered into certain races, or do you have a lot of latitude?
I'm extraordinarily lucky. I consider myself to be extraordinarily lucky because my sponsors allow me to choose what I want to do. And, I'll be totally transparent that like, there are some trade-offs, right? That like, if you choose as an athlete not to participate in these super high visibility events, like your earning potential is less, like just, it is what it is. However, my sponsors do not force me to do any of those things. And they, let me decide what motivates me. And like, I can't see myself doing something, like putting a ton of energy into something that isn't intrinsically motivating for me. Like it wouldn't work, because every time I get out training, like I'm reminding myself, like, why am I doing this? And it's because I have this objective, and that objective I chose, and I want to do this, and I'm doing this for me, not for somebody else. And like, that's how I function completely. Today I'm like doing 3 uphills and I'm like, oh man, this is like a serious slog, but I'm like, this is one step to make me stronger for this goal that I wanted to do.
What are you training for right now, by the way?
I'm training for World Championships.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's right, racing for France.
I'm racing for France. Yeah.
Okay. That's really cool.
I think it's pretty cool. I think that sort of possibly winning the French championship was like the best way to celebrate getting nationality. It was like,
when did you get nationality? How long ago?
Funny French administration anecdote is that it's a long process, and they do not, the only way that that you've gotten citizenship is that it is published in the official journal, which is this massive government document that is published online every day. And like, you don't get a letter in the mail. You just have to download the PDF of the official journal and you have to download it in order to Control F. You can't even do it online. So I did that like after we did. So you like fulfill the criteria necessary to be able to apply, and then you apply, and then you do an interview and all of this. And after that, they were like, okay, it'll be 10 to 18 months before you get a response. And so at 10 months, I started downloading the official journal every single day. And after 18 months, there was like still no news. And they told us like, if you don't hear anything after 6 months, it's probably good news. And so after 18 months, we like reached out, and that was last February, I think. And they're like, oh, that's strange. And then we just got in like May or March, like, you were naturalized on April 9th, 2023. And it was after 9.5 months instead of 10. So I knew I was French. I know I've been French for like a year and a little bit, but it's actually been over 2 years.
Wow. Yeah. And we were talking offline too. And maybe it would mostly just be for the Americans that are here, but because you're so immersed in life over here, you could right now walk through the streets of Chamonix and maybe the Americans wouldn't recognize you.
I mean, yeah, I think both because I don't live in the US and because I don't race in the US and I don't do like these super high visibility races. Like I can very easily get around with, nobody knowing who I am.
That's amazing.
Which is absolutely fine by me.
Kind of a blessing, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a gauntlet over there right now, I think.
In some ways, I would say I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But on the other hand, like for a lot of people, it's really exciting. And it's like, the absolute highlight of their year or their life to get to see this like crazy trail running centric world. What I would say about it is, for me, is that what's going on in Chamonix right now is not what I love about trail running. Like all of the brands and the like products and, like it's not what motivates me. It's not what, lights up, my imagination. And so
if you could replace the scene there with what motivates you, what would it look like?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I don't really know. I think I just don't feel like people who are coming to the UTMB necessarily are like getting the best out of this place. And like what I love about this place is like are these incredible landscapes and these moments of solitude. And like maybe the truth is that like no giant event could do that, but maybe I also think that like I personally, I'm like way more into like sort of the smaller grassroots events where it's much smaller groups of people getting together and, you know, taking their time a little bit. And yeah.
And I'm just thinking about like, and I don't want to say they're like underdog events, but I'm always shocked every time I come here that of all of the UTMB events, like the PTL doesn't get like a ton of fanfare. And I think Doug is doing it. I think Doug is doing the PTL right now.
Doug has dropped out of the PTL.
Oh, he's dropped out of the PTL.
Yes. He had a stomach bug.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Which I think going 300 kilometers with diarrhea would be.
Yes.
And I think he was feeling terrible and looking at this weather forecast.
But given how steeped in this valley Doug is, I would imagine that that's a massive vote of confidence to how engaging that route is if he's doing it. And like, does any of that stuff does anything on the PTL course compare to, like, again, this is going to come out of left field or super uneducated, but does anything on that PTL course come close to what you're interested in? Because they're wearing all the helmets and stuff. And
yeah, for sure. I mean, the PTL course, so it changes every single year. It's not the same course. And actually, when you go into it, you don't even know, like you sign up and you don't know what the course is going to be. And they release the course pretty late in the year. And part of that is because there's a lot of negotiation that they have to do with private landowners and also like, you know, nature reserves and national parks to get authorizations to go through some of them. And then there's a lot of off-trail stuff, and they don't actually want people going and wrecking the race course, you know, for weeks and weeks beforehand. And I think that's, you know, in part, it has to do with like, what is the impact that we're leaving on the environment? And especially if it's off trail, if you've got like a bunch of people who are doing the course or who are just like, yeah, or who are doing the race or who are just like, oh, this looks cool. You know, I'll follow this GPX track. Like they actually don't want people all year round, like going over all of these, you know, passes and through these, you know, national parks off trail and stuff like that. So I think like the approach is like way different. I don't really look at the PTL as a race. The way, like, I mean, definitely, you know, the people who are leading are like absolutely extraordinary athletes. It's the Gabiou brothers who are, you know, pretty far ahead of the rest of the crowd right now. And, you know, they've won it before, but like, it's not a race in the way that we usually think about racing. And I think that's pretty cool. Some of the terrain I think is really awesome. You know, they go out on bits of glacier. They go in, you know, pretty technical kind of like scrambly areas. And I like that a lot. I'm not currently in my life or career at a place where I would like to go for 300 kilometers without stopping. It's not really.
That's too long of a days in the mountains.
Too long. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like where I'm at right now, missing more than one night of sleep is more than I want to miss. I really like sleeping.
For someone, yeah, like I like what you said earlier. Or it was interesting hearing you say that, you know, maybe what goes on around UTMB week isn't as representative as you would like of some of the cool stuff that goes on here that you could go do. And for someone that wants to like slightly break out of their trail running mold, is there anything that you would recommend that they do in this week?
In this week, I think it's pretty hard. What I would say is like, stay here next week. Like, of course, if you've done a UTMB race, then you're going to be too broken to be able to do much of anything. But like, it is incredible. Beginning on Monday, like it just like clears out. And
what should I go do?
And what should you go do?
Because this is our last interview.
Yeah. I mean,
I've got some time.
I could give you a bunch of different like cool places to run that are totally off the beaten track. And yeah, there's a lot to offer. Trying some of the other kinds of activities. You know, I guess one of the things that I think about in the way that I think about my own practice with trail running is that it's like, I mean, it's cliche, right? But it's like an iceberg, right? And what you see is the tip, and it's this performance part of it. But there's all of this other stuff that you don't see underneath that, which is like days when I'm just going out in the mountains and I'm stopping and, you know, eating a picnic and looking at the view, or just like, or I'm like down on my hands and knees looking at, little alpine plants that I think are interesting or whatever. And like those kind of like slower, quiet moments, I think is something that we don't see at all represented in UTMB week. And I think that is something that's really missing. And so in some ways, it's almost not that important where you go after or outside of UTMB week. It's more about how you approach it.
Okay, so a little bit of faffing.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I'm very efficient. I get my sandwich out really quickly, but then I eat it slowly.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But I mean, there's so much cool stuff to see. And I don't know, I'm also thinking about the I saw like this Instagram video of a year ago or something, and it's like these two guys who are out on a trail together, and one of them is like looking at like sphagnum moss or something, and he's like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. And his friend is looking out at the view and going like, I know, it's so beautiful. And they like realize that they're talking about two different things, but that like both are very valuable. And I feel like like the looking closely, looking big, like taking the time to take it all in and not just like snap a quick picture for your Instagram and like run off, is sometimes what we're missing. And if I can share, I have this like hypothesis sort of my theory of one of the reasons, and this is not just a trail running thing, but this is like tourism generally, and especially what I see in Chamonix, is that there's like almost an extractive approach to it, in which like, I'm going to come to this place. I'm going to extract what is valuable to me, whether that is a performance, whether that is, the Instagram picture for my feed. And then I am going to get the heck out of here. And I'm not actually going to like contribute anything or learn much of anything about this place. And so it's like almost like, yeah, it's an approach that doesn't resonate with me. And I think that I've personally really in the last several years tried to change my own approach to travel in a way that I'm like trying not to do that. And like, I remember this conversation I had with someone who used to work at UTMB, and we were talking about like travel and traveling for races and stuff like that. And she said, oh, well, like you're never going to convince the Palettis that like travel isn't valuable. And I fully believe that travel is valuable. Like I am not anti-travel, but the approach to how we travel for me has evolved a lot. And I don't feel like actually traveling for performance and for races, like you get the best things out of travel. Like if you tell me like, oh yeah, I want to come do the UTMB because I want to like experience French culture. Like what are people learning about French culture or about the Chamonix Valley when they come here? They're having some kind of experience, but like the idea with the UTMB World Series is that like you can go and have the UTMB experience in all of these different places around the world. But like, that's like trying to just transplant a generic experience in a gazillion different places without ever like being like, okay, then what did you learn? And like, what did you bring to the place that's like specific to that place? And I think for me, that's missing.
What are some ingredients to the better way as you see it?
I mean, I think that, there is value. Like I'm very ambivalent. I don't have great answers, but I think that there is value in letting races really like keep their local flavor and not just like try to carbon copy exactly, what is at, the iconic races to like, make the exact same thing. You want a high quality race. You want, a cool track, you want good course marking, you want clear rules, you want it to be safe, like that is important. But then like, and then we're going to have like a village with stands with all of the different brands, and then we're going to have like events and like activations and all of this. Like that's just like carbon copied all over the world. And it's like, you could be anywhere. You could honestly be anywhere. And to me, sort of like trying to get away from that and have like something that is, more local flavor, maybe having race courses that aren't like, oh, well, it needs to be 100K. So we're going to like make you do this weird loop that doesn't mean anything to add 7 kilometers so that we hit the right distance. Like, no, like adapt it to the local terrain, you know, like make it make sense. That's one thing I think for me.
Does the Skyrunner series have this problem?
Um,
Or do they do it better?
I would say that it's very race dependent. So the Skyrunner series is, there are all sorts of things I could criticize about that as well. That's actually me really embracing my Frenchness, is criticizing everything. But, but I would say that like there definitely is, like if you do one of the Italian sky races versus one of the French ones versus, you know, one somewhere else in the world, like there's definitely more of that kind of like, you feel like the local feel to it. And I think in some ways that's because they are smaller events that you can, like it's more manageable and you can have it be like a little less homogenous in a way. But I think on the other hand, that especially when new races are joining the circuit, and of course there are just way too many races on the circuit, it's like you can't understand anything, and it's like the level is very diluted. It's pushing people to travel just to get points. There's lots of problems with it. But when they're integrating new races, they're not necessarily yet able to hold the races to a high standard of quality. And so there are like the things that I was saying, like around like course markings and safety and like some of like the standard professional race stuff, they're not uniform in how that's executed. So there's like maybe a happy medium somewhere.
And then like if we're using Chamonix as the example, what would be some parts of the checklist where it's like, if I'm showing up in a way that's like to learn and to contribute, like how does that path look? Because I would argue I am probably existing in the extractive mode right now, where it's like we're coming here, we're taking advantage of the fact that there's a lot of people here for UTMB, a lot of people here that we could pluck off the streets for interviews. We're actually probably spending more time in this Airbnb than we are actually out there in the community. So I'm really curious to learn.
I think that for me, one of the first steps is actually acknowledging that while right now this is the mecca of trail running, historically, that's not what this place is all about. And I think that there's a lot of tension also. And this is like, I think that some of my, you know, feelings about big events generally and like big international events has to do with the fact that I live here and I like know more about the history and the other realities. But I feel like most people who are coming here this week think about Chamonix through the lens of trail running and trail running only. And understanding that actually like that's not the main driver of like the whole community here, is something that's really important. And understanding like what is the history, kind of like what are the things historically that are important here. And you know, there is a lot of, and like who are the other users on the trail, you know, like these aren't just a bunch of trails that were made for trail runners. And, you know, sometimes it's like, it comes from the like saying bonjour to people on the trail is like, it's not just a bunch of people out here running and like trying to get better. It's like there are a lot of people who are out here for other reasons. And you need to be like acknowledging those other users and acknowledging that you are part of this ecosystem of people using this valley, but you're not the only, you know, the only user and the only one that's important. And like when we can see that also just like, you know, again, on the trails that like some people, a lot of trail runners just assume because they're going fast, they should always have the right of way, you know? And it's like this lack of comprehension that like, no, you're not actually, this isn't just here for you. And I think, you know, probably also being married to an alpinist is part of, you know, like why I see that other vision. And also, I mean, we came here, we were working for both of us for the Research Center for Alpine Ecosystems, which is a nonprofit research center that studies the impacts of climate change on mountain biodiversity. And the scientific history in the Chamonix Valley is absolutely extraordinary. And that's like why people like were coming here and why people were going up peaks. It was like for science and understanding that there are like all these other things that kind of like inform how this valley came to be how it is, rather than just like, oh, I'm going to take it at face value, this snapshot of a trail running back. Like, to me, that's it. That would be a start.
There's a lot of people that I would say the audience for this show is very heavily North American. So I think this is a really interesting point. Like, could you talk about some of the important historical tidbits that extend beyond like the bubble of trail running here?
Yeah. I mean, so like, I would say that mountain tourism was like born in Chamonix. Basically, there were people living here for a long time, but it was actually British people coming to the valley. These guys, Wyndham and Pocock, were like the first ones, but like they came, and when people first came here, like the mountains were considered like cursed and like scary and like places you might die. And
that's like New England.
Yeah.
It was New England too.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of people, or a lot of places, you know, like when you go other places, like there are oftentimes like, you know, ideas around like the spirits in the mountains, and some of that has to do with, you know, like safety and stuff like that. But so before sort of this tourism was born, it was just like, oh, like we don't really go up there because it's like dangerous and scary and like you might die. And then the Brits came and were like, this place is really pretty and like people should visit this and like, and, you know, see it. And that's sort of like where things were born. And I think that's something that's super interesting about Chamonix is because mountain tourism was kind of born here, is that we have like this historical reference for what the valley was like, you know, a few hundred years ago, that allows us to also understand like how it's changing over time. And yeah, I mean, like then really, I'm like doing a big fast forward, but like it was for science that like people wanted to climb Mont Blanc. Like de Saussure was this like Genevan kind of savant, and he was like put up this money like to say like whoever can get up Mont Blanc and like see if it's even possible, like can one live like stay alive and get 15, to the summit, yeah. You know, like I'll give a bunch of money. And so that was like this quest, you know, to get up the mountain. And like this guy Joseph Vallot, who, so like you might have noticed between Chamonix and here, it's called the Rue Vallot, and there's an observatory way up, and he like basically, you know, was all about like science. He built his observatory up there and an observatory down here, and it was like, you know, glaciology and physiology and astronomy and like all of these things. You would never have gone up in the mountains without like a bunch of instruments to take measures and all of that. And so that was like really, really driving it early on. And there are still scientists doing lots of studies around here, whether it's on, you know, climate change specifically, or, you know, there is a guy who works for the ENSA, so the National Ski and Alpinism School, and he's a doctor, and he does like high altitude physiology experiments up at the Aiguille du Midi, like people, you know, going on bike trainers and sleeping up there and stuff like that. So like there's just like this push for understanding in science that's like really, you know, anchored in this place that I think is super interesting. Then, I mean, other just like interesting dates, right? Very first Winter Olympics were here, 1928, very first Winter Olympics, and like winter sports was really, you know, like born in a lot of ways. Performance around that was like born here, and Chamonix very much identifies with that. And I think knowing about like some of those things can help you understand like what this valley is all about. And trail running, honestly, like the guy Joseph Vallot that I mentioned back at the end of the 1800s, he organized a race from the church in Chamonix, so where the UTMB starts, to the top of Brevant and back down. But it was only guides who were allowed to do it, mountain guides. So it's like there's even like this trail running and mountain guiding like crossover that has existed for, you know, almost a century and a half.
I think one of the takeaways I have from just your description there is it's a little actually tragic to me, because you have to be self-motivated to go get that knowledge. Like, that's just you independently being curious, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like, where
We don't go to school for this as a community.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of it's like where I worked and, like just talking to people here. But like, honestly, if you go through Chamonix, not just like scanning for the store that's selling the thing that you need, and instead you like take the time to look at the monuments and the plaques and all of this. Yeah, that has to be self-motivated. But there is so much stuff about history in downtown Chamonix that like if you like there's the statue in like right by the post office, and it's actually was in part gifted by the Appalachian Mountain Club of Boston,
No
but it's
way.
been there since like 1900, and it's de Saussure and Payot, Venance Payot, I think, and they're pointing up at the summit of Mont Blanc, and that's the guy who paid for the guy standing next to him was one of the first ascensionists, being like, I want you to go up there and do science. And like, if you stop and read the plaque on the back, then like you could learn something. Of course, it's probably in French, so probably maybe you can't read it.
I don't know if this is a super small tidbit. I learned the other day, or I was told the other day, that up until about 40 or 50 years ago, on this end of the valley, the glacier extended all the way down, and the only way to get into Chamonix was from Switzerland. Is that true?
I don't think that was 40 or 50 years ago, but like certainly within human history. And like, yeah, I can't give you dates on that, but I can definitely say that, for example, like when guiding the profession first started a little over 200 years ago, like their bread and butter was going like walking down Les Bois, so like right by here, and bringing people to visit like an ice cave at the toe of the glacier, and they literally had to do zero vert.
Yeah.
Like they would just like walk and go look at the caves right there. And now, I mean, it's so far up you can't see it at all.
So, and again, if we're like talking about environmentalism here for a second, I think the brand that I've been exposed to recently, like the encouragement is more so like stay home, immerse yourself in your backyard, and just like deeply appreciate that stuff, and maybe like remove a lot of travel altogether. But it sounds like the brand that you're a proponent for is, yes, you can travel, and if you travel, just make sure you like bring this social responsibility component and like get to know the area and like go to the monuments, retract a little bit of the commercialism piece of it. Like, am I getting that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think like I would love to also introduce that. It's interesting that you say that, because I feel like, I am quite involved in, environmentalism work, especially here in Europe. And my analysis is that when it comes to environmental activism, the US and Europe are kind of at different ends of the spectrum in terms of like what you should do and who is responsible. So like in the US, I actually feel like we have much more gone to a like individual action doesn't really matter that much. Like it's a drop in the bucket. What matters is societal change. We got to lobby. We've got to, change the system in which we live.
Yep.
But like you can essentially do whatever you want individually because you didn't create the system you live in. Whereas the European model that I see much more is, oh no, like in order to hit the Paris Accord agreement, like it needs to be 2 tons of CO2 per person per year, not more. One transatlantic flight is going to get you more than that. So like, this is on you. And I see, really negative things about both of those and positive things sort of about both of those. I think that, on the European side, it leads to a lot of finger pointing and fears of hypocrisy and like, I can't say anything because I'm not perfect. And like, that can be super problematic. On the other end of the spectrum, though, like it's very convenient not to ever have to really call into question your own decision making and whether or not like, and make hard decisions about whether like you are, you should be making sacrifices, for example. And I think that there is a happy medium. And in my happy medium, it is neither like go fly as much as you want, whenever, and that's totally cool. nor is it, I'm never going to take the plane again, which is the other end of the spectrum, and we do see athletes like, for example, Xavier Thévenard, who won the UTMB, I don't know how many times.
Very decorated.
What's that?
Very decorated.
Very decorated trail runner who will no longer fly.
I didn't know that.
He's completely done.
When did this happen?
Oh boy, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Really?
Of course, it's easy and convenient in a certain way to like say that living in the French Alps.
No hard rock or any American.
He also has Lyme disease, so is very much not able to be racing right now. But it was super influential in Europe. I see those as two sort of, extremes, and somewhere in the center, you have my approach, which is, as you said, like, I have not sworn off travel, but do I say yes to every opportunity that is, like given to me? Do I, I'll no longer fly to do a race one weekend somewhere and fly back. Like that doesn't line up with my values anymore. And so like I still travel. I was actually in Bolivia last year, for example, for a project, but I try to be very mindful about it. I knew that I wanted to have that trip to Bolivia. And so the year before I didn't fly at all. And when I went to Bolivia, I spent a month there, and like, I'm very lucky to be able to spend a month. I recognize that not everybody has that vacation time or can work remotely, which we were also able to do. But like, I'm weighing a lot like, okay, I have an opportunity to travel. Do I need to travel? Is this something that I could do remotely? Is this something that I could forgo? No. Okay. Like, how can I approach it in such a way that like, it resonates more with me? I went to Kendall Mountain Festival last year, for example, and like, I am clear about my privilege because trains are a lot more expensive than flying in Europe. And I was able to do that. And I took a 12-hour train ride to get there rather than an hour and a half flight. And so I'm thinking about this a lot. I'm weighing every decision. And that, like, for those people who can allow that for themselves, like, I really encourage, that kind of introspection and mindfulness when it comes to traveling.
So from a philosophical standpoint, even if a problem is way bigger than you, would you still say you need to maintain a sense of agency towards the problem?
I would say that, absolutely.
So you're not in the hopelessness camp or anything like that?
I'm not in the hopelessness camp. I'm not into hopelessness. And, part of that is like, how could you get up in the morning? But I am an optimist. I'm ever an optimist. And I would say that it can get really hard to be an optimist, especially living here, because I think that a lot of people live in places that are not currently on a daily basis being affected by climate change. And it's pretty easy to forget what's happening. Where I live, we have the impacts in front of our eyes every single day. And the speed with which things are changing is really remarkable. You take the Mer de Glace, and in this spring, from beginning of May to mid-June, we had a bunch of hot weather. It lost 4 meters of thickness. We're talking about, like almost 15 feet of depth. And so that's like, I can't pretend that's not happening, but if you're not living close to that and you are going from an air-conditioned house into an air-conditioned car into an air-conditioned office, like, you're not feeling it on a daily basis. You're not seeing it. And so I do understand that it's not as salient of a problem for everyone. But I do think that, we are all impacted or going to be impacted at some point. The French government actually recently commissioned a report called the PNACC Sport, which the French do love their acronyms, but it's the National Plan for the Adaptation to Climate Change for Sports. And the report goes through like every popular sport in France and explains how it is already impacting or will be impacting those sports. So like, municipal pools can't be filled already sometimes because of drought. You like playing tennis? Well, like above a certain temperature, like the tennis court, the ball doesn't bounce the same way or it sticks. Like in every sport is seeing it. I have a hard time imagining our current administration in the US commissioning the same kind of report. But like, helping people to understand like how will it hit home for you, I think is something that's really interesting. My hope is that when people do come to Chamonix and they see it, they're like, oh wow, like this is very real.
I told you offline how I've been gone 3 years. I was last year in 22, and yeah, the amount of change I've seen in this valley is remarkable in 3 years.
Yeah.
Last place before we go. I am a big fan of introducing new books to the audience when I come across them. And in that Black Diamond Mont Blanc video, you referenced Mountains of the Mind.
Yeah.
Sell that book to the audience.
Oh man, Mountains of the Mind is, I believe the subtitle is A History of Our Fascination with Mountains. And it is a book written by Robert McFarlane, who's an author from the UK, and I'm a total fangirl. He writes really, really beautifully, but it's a collection of essays basically tracing through like our cultural obsession with mountains over time. And it's like, I don't know if I've ever like marked so many pages in a book before as like, this is an extraordinary idea, or like this resonates with me so much. And like, you know, an example actually would be that he describes like, and I think this could be true of, you know, an ultra race as it is of of going out and doing alpinism, but that, you know, it's like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And the kids go into the wardrobe and they live this extraordinary experience that's just like completely changes who they are, sort of profoundly and fundamentally. And then they get out of the wardrobe and like time was like eclipsed, right? Nothing, like, you know, 10 minutes have passed. Nothing has changed. And they like get out and they're like, wait a minute, like, can't you see that I have changed? Like, I have experienced something incredible and nothing around them has changed. And I remember reading that and just being like, yes, I feel that way every time I come down from like a weekend in the mountains, that I'm just like, oh my God, but I'm different. Can't people see that I am somehow different?
Yeah.
And that's just an example. And this book actually was made, parts of it, extracts were made into a movie, I think called Mountain. And it's Willem Dafoe who does voiceover reading like extracts of the book with like extraordinary, it might be Renan Ozturk videography. And it's just, I mean, it's just like a book that you'll read it and you'll just be like, yes, yes. So everybody should read Mountains of the Mind. Go get yourself a copy.
Last question for you. Favorite athlete to follow in the sport right now, or in any sport?
Oh man.
Or recently, who has impressed you? It could be for advocacy. It could be for performance. It could be for lifestyle. It could be anything.
Oh boy. I mean, I do feel like I should say that I actually consume precious little like sport content generally, but
outside the sport counts too.
Oh well, that's like opening it way too large. I mean, I would, because so I like can be very impressed by sporting performances. And I think that we've had some extraordinary performances, and I was, you know, tuned into like the Tour de France Femme, and all of that. But I would say that actually, personally, what resonates with me the most are athletes who are using their platforms to say something about, you know, our society, our environment, something like that. You know, I think about the, you know, the quote from, I think it's from Spider-Man, right? With great with great power comes great responsibility, right? And that resonates with me. And I love to see athletes who are using their platforms to talk about things. And I would just, you know, like offhandedly say, for example, like Vincent Bouillard, who won UTMB last year, he opens his mouth very rarely, but when he does, like, listen, it's super interesting.
I think that's the perfect place to stop. Hillary, it's been an absolute joy to have you in the studio, and cannot wait to follow your performance at the World Champs next month.
Can't wait to go.